Christian myself, and someone fascinated by our ancient traditions and folkways, I want to understand the meaning of the rebirth of paganism in the West, and what it heralds for our future. I have the chance to meet and travel with a rising figure in the online world, an historian and an online educational filmmaker.
Found some hot springs, they're boiling, it'll take the skin off you.
And one of the most influential figures in the rebirth of paganism in the West. Who reaches millions of people around the world with a spiritual worldview that radically questions not only some of my own beliefs, but more importantly, his convictions challenge our modern values and our modern way of viewing reality itself. On all sorts of subjects, you learn this uncomfortable truth about reality. It's all over the place.
Philosophy, biology, every single subject, literature even, they're there's old books that they're not going to read anymore. That's why I have enemies, basically, because they perceive that I am rocking the boat.
Journeying to a land of sagas, of folklore and Vikings. A place whose history and literary impact inspired many of my own heroes, like J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis.
In my childhood, I was a firm believer in the supernatural. I lived in a world of ghosts and demons and devils and things like that. It was the very hard process in adolescence to become an atheist. And I think it was so hard because I didn't really believe it. I tried to convince myself that I lived in this disenchanted world that was the official world of the West. You know what I mean? It's the world that cool people or respectable people claim exists. It's a world of pure materiality with no enchantment. But it was very difficult for me to believe in it, even though, in a sense, it was liberating, because it was liberating me from the fear of the devil, the fear of the supernatural. But I never really, I think if believing in something makes you feel good, it's probably a cope. It's probably not really true. I knew before my first degree that media in the modern world is power, and that everything everyone believes is due to mostly to exposure to media. I could tell that intuitively, so I was like, well, what's the point of studying anything else? A lot of people say there's a Mickey Mouse degree, and why don't you get a proper job? I was like, in the world we live in, there is no power greater than media. It's the church of the time. My ancestors, most of my predecessors have been priests or lawyers. Well, that's the power of the time. The power of our time is media. But then afterwards, I realized also, when I finished the degree, that I was impoverished intellectually, and that's why I went through this process in my early 20s of just devouring books, reading as much as I could. It's interesting that in the Palestinian Lied, the German Crusader song, they refer to the Muslims in the Holy Land as heathen.
Yes.
And that heathen, the word heathen was used in Icelandic literature to refer to the pagans, and by Anglo-Saxons to refer to Vikings, and to native English pagans. The heathen was a native Germanic word to refer to rural people who persisted in polytheism.
Yeah, those on the heath.
But yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that as soon as newly Christian West comes into contact with Muslims, they apply the Germanic word for polytheist to the Muslims.
Yes.
Don't both of those words have basically the same root, like pagan or paganus, and heathen? I'll be being the native from the soil, from the dirt, or from the
it is basically heathen is basically a translation of paganus.
Looks like I'm chubbing up to him.
I believe
in the cinema.
Decent sausage.
they got my laptop.
I knew they'd have it.
Sometimes I'll actually send it to you, but if it's your fault, they maybe won't.
It was so embarrassing. They told and like asked me like, what color is it? I was like, yeah, it's white. And she was like, no, it's gray. I was like, okay. I was like,
Yeah, that's what I said. Great, yeah.
It's like, what color is the bag? I was like, yeah, it's like black brownish, and there's no brown on it at all. It's so stupid.
Look at this beautiful sunshine. He said it's excellent for flavouring. Oh, I should have brought the Survive the Jive sticker here. Yeah, but not all. Eddie Hall broke the record. Eddie Hall was the record-breaking deadlift.
Eddie Hall. There's a competition. It's the strong Viking like Hafthor and Jón Páll.
Yeah.
And Magnus Sverre was also one. Yeah. A strong man who won the world record, and for North FC.
North FC is the other one, yeah. So it's either all Northwestern Europeans are very strong, but also
only the
African Americans are quite strong too sometimes.
Only the North FC can rival the Vikings. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, it's ancient rivals.
Yeah, it's an ancient rivalry.
So my interest in paganism began, say, very early 2006. It was sort of like galvanized by reading Nietzsche and seeing the way he was so inspired by the classics. I was also learning about Aztec religion, about Egyptian religion, like Roman religion. My interest was broadly in paganism. Native American custom was just like, I'm not an atheist anymore. I know I had enough like experiences to understand that atheism was wrong, but I didn't know what my religion was. And then as I studied and studied pre-Christian and like polytheistic cultures in general, it was very clear that the idea of a religion is inappropriate to talk about it. You don't really choose a religion. The correct way of practicing polytheism is to practice the polytheism of your ancestors, of your culture. And I recognized, okay, well, I'm English. So what is English polytheism? And a lot of people in Britain mistakenly believe that that should be Celtic, but it isn't really, because the English ethnogenesis in the early Middle Ages, in the Dark Ages, was always Germanic, and the culture has been, there's a constant, like, unbroken tradition linking us to the English ethnic group. We still call ourselves the English ethnic group, which is a term used in Anglo-Saxon England. Anglo-Saxon is a synonym of English, and the word English predates the word Anglo-Saxon. So these people called themselves English before they called themselves Anglo-Saxons. So it's not like two different things. And those people worshipped Woden, and they worshipped these Germanic gods. And although we can understand a bit about Anglo-Saxon religion or English religion from English sources, and there are many of those which I've talked about in my videos, including magical spells and sort of explication of the general nature of their religion by the venerable Bede, or Beda as he was known in Old English, but there's no discussion of the mythology. There's no real talk about the gods of mythology. But what we can tell from etymology, which is the science of the way words are related, is that it's the same religion as the Icelanders practiced, and that Icelandic chieftain Snorri Sturluson wrote down in the 13th century. So Odin is Woden. It's the same god. Thunor is Thor. It's the same god. It's not like it's just a different way of pronouncing the word. And although some academics might try to claim that they were different, it's sort of like claiming that the word wolf and ulf refer to different animals. And we know that they had the same mythical connotations, but we can see in the archaeology that Woden's artifacts are depicted with two birds, the two ravens that Snorri describes. And we know in the poetry of the Anglo-Saxons, they talk about him as being hanged, and Snorri describes, and Hávamál, the poem that Snorri preserved, which is not written by him, it's an ancient pagan poem, it describes how Odin hanged as a self-sacrifice. So it's the same religion. So from there, I understood I must, as an Englishman, be practicing English religion. And the only way I can understand English religion is with the gift of Icelandic literature, which helps give us an insight into Germanic religion in general. Are the sagas still relevant to Icelandic people?
Some things.
Yeah, some things. Not completely relevant, because not the boring parts, you know. But you know, it's good to have those kind of books today to see like our ancestors, to see
what it was like, because it's story that's been traveling from people for many years, and when the paper came they all wrote it down, so it's not like exactly how it was but how their stories went on, you know. So I think that's also fun.
So if you have children one day, will you encourage them to read it?
Yeah, they will probably say it's boring and hard to read, but it's worth it when you finish the book.
Yeah, I would just the same answer,
Yeah.
There is, in a very strong sense, I believe, a return throughout Europe and America, especially among Europeans, a longing for the transcendent, for religion, for ritual, for a rootedness in this global world. And I, of course, experienced that also among many of my friends who have gone from the secular, atheistic, materialistic worldview to embrace different sorts of Christianity, mostly traditional forms of Lutheranism or traditional forms of Roman Catholicism. But I've also seen a great interest and growth in Norse paganism, both in Denmark but also in other European countries. And you are probably one of the guys to talk to about that. Especially since, you know, the decline of the new atheism movement in the West. I really felt like something has changed, especially among young males in particular. A longing or hunger almost for the religious, for ritual, for rootedness. What do you think has caused this hunger or this desire? Because it seems in our modern culture, we have gained a lot of things: material wealth, security, technology, at an unprecedented scale. But it seems clear to me that we have also lost something. The local communities don't play or function in the same way as they used to, and the way that global culture has become so dominated by American meta-culture has also, I think, caused people to find out that they have lost a sense of identity.
They've got an elk with Odin on it and the serpents, and he's holding, and he's got a rune.
Nice. Yeah.
It's Odin on.
What's the name of the two wolves I always forget?
Freki and Gerri.
Oh yeah. They're not as rooted in their history, in their country, in their people as they have been. Do you think that might also be one of the reasons why people are longing for a more traditional approach to religion?
There's a kind of different sort of cause of these two things, actually. One, the desire for the return to the transcendent or find enchantment in the world is caused by a combination of the cultural direction the West has taken, like since the Enlightenment and rationality and you know, the scientism that is dominant in our culture, as well as the effect of technology as driving a wedge between man and the created world. But then the sort of focus on a return to ethnicity or ethno-specific traditions is the consequence rather of finding oneself in the chaotic multicultural West. So where so many of the newly arriving peoples of non-Western origin focus intensely on their ethnic identity. And there is also a political and social incentive to have ethnic identity. And the Western, particularly the Anglo-cultural tradition, is not to be ethnic. Being an Anglo is specifically not to be focused on one's ancestry. It's to have like ideals that are considered, rightly or wrongly, to be universal. And to assume that others who don't have those don't have them simply because of the barriers that their ethnic specific traditions, viewed largely as superstitious and primitive, have created between them and the final, you know, crowning pinnacle of human achievement, which is Western liberalism. I've interviewed a lot of people, even in like more than 10 years ago, from Runes to Ruins. I interviewed a lot of people and asked them like why, like a kind of random cross-section of heathens and people, and they all said the same thing, which is that there was something lacking in modernity, and that they did say about being rooted, but they didn't so much talk about ethnicity. Although like within heathenry there is like an openly right-wing element who will make heathenry as much as possible about ethnic identity, because as a rebellion against the sort of the taboo of the time. But there are equally those who try to deny any ethnic significance to the religion, or try and make it more open to others. But what they would all have in common, I think, is obviously that something about the modern worldview is insufficient. And that's probably more to do with enchantment, opposing the disenchantment of the world, even if it's done in a sort of not fully conscious way. And Christianity, of course, also sees an enchanted world, but it might be to do with the fact that Christianity, it sort of planted the seeds of its own nemesis of modernity, and then has subsequently been absorbed into modernity in such a way that its initial enchanting aspect has been neutralized in many respects, so that, then people are adjusting the theology of Christianity in many denominations to suit the preferences of the consensus of the Western ideology, which is not really religious at all.
Oh, this is wonderful!
Is it?
Yes, perfect! This is great!
It's not like too cold?
No!
Dude, I'm kind of envious.
Oh, I think that's where it's rough.
This is amazing.
Welcome to Iceland.
If we get caught in a snowstorm up here,
Just have to
we
lie
come
here.
near. Yeah, we go in the bog like the ancient Britons, and the Romans show up, and then
This is what Caesar saw when he arrived in Britain. This
just-
is the life.
Now we
We
need...
forgot the beers.
I got one!
I don't want to get out now because we'll be freezing out. As soon as we get out, we'll freeze our asses off.
No, I mean, he just
we're in a catch-22.
We're like those Japanese monkeys that sit in the fucking hot springs.
I read philosophy in the wrong order. I began with Nietzsche, which is that doesn't make sense, because Nietzsche's whole point is that he's a hammer to the previous philosophy. But nevertheless, I took on some Nietzschean mode of approach to thought, where he deconstructs. And actually, even before having read Nietzsche, I was like, in school they make us read Marx and Freud, and some also in university for my media degree I did, the Frankfurt School, Adorno, Horkheimer, and these kind of people, Foucault, whatever. These people have all they're Nietzschean Marxists in the sense that they've taken that philosophy their approach of philosophizing with the hammer. So if you start with that angle of start for first principles, then you're willing to kill sacred cows. You're somewhat iconoclastic in the ideological sense. And for me, even when I was in my first degree, my bachelor's which I finished in 2006 or 7, I did my dissertation on the misrepresentation of white people in horror films. So I said, why is it that... So we've given all this stuff about misrepresentation of blacks in film and whatever, and women, how they're objectified and cut up with shots and things like this. And I was like, well, I noticed that horror films often depict rural white communities as being full of murderous and dangerous, latent, evil. Whereas the reality, statistically, is that actually murderers are mostly in the cities, and rural...
Films like Midsommar.
Well, this was long before Midsommar came out, but I focused on British and American films from the 70s to try and limit, the scope of the dissertation. But, The Hills Have Eyes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Straw Dogs, there's loads of them, and it's non-stop for decade after decade after decade. And it's a trend, and it's continued with modern films like Midsommar. And it's completely not reflective of reality at all. There are a few places in the world where you can be more safe than in a rural white community. And without any intention of being racist or countercultural, I just thought, well, I'll use the tools of cultural critique that I've been equipped with to illuminate this thing. And it wasn't well received, my dissertation, surprisingly by my left-wing professors. Afterwards, I went on and on to try and understand why why is there this animus towards white people and rural white communities? And things were revealed to me, and I continued to learn about that. And of course, people see me practicing an indigenous European religion and saying that there's nothing wrong with being a person of European descent, and also questioning other sacred cows of Western ideology, the post-war consensus, liberalism itself, and naturally seeing me as a threat, and I get persecuted by the British government, prevented from entering America by Homeland Security and things like this. I've never done anything illegal, anything to hurt anyone. I've never threatened anyone or said anything negative about other races, like denigrated them. But just having taken a fresh approach to the world I live in is enough to make me a far more, like, they've honoured me with this opposition, because I'm not really as significant in my own mind as these events would indicate I am. But yes, that's why I have enemies, basically, because they perceive that I am rocking the boat.
Well, I mean, it does seem to be the case that I think a lot of young people can probably relate to the experience. If they're intellectually curious, they're interested in the world, they're interested in other cultures and nations and biology, and then they start kind of just researching or going through information they find online or reading the latest research papers on all sorts of subjects, especially like in genetics or history. And they tend to sort of uncover information that's like, do I even want to know this information? Because it's like, to even know this information, it's like to possess a curse. It's like you're kind of cursed with forbidden knowledge. It's like, well, if I've learned this uncomfortable truth about reality, about, kind of pick your subject.
Yeah,
it's all over the place.
Biology, like every single subject, literature even, like there are there's old books like they're not going to read anymore. Like Shakespeare they've tried to ban Shakespeare. So there's so many taboos, and it's almost like it's fragile. It's actually a fragile ecosystem of taboos that's I think is hopefully going to fall to pieces now.
Yeah. I think my American free speech instinct is always like, let's just kind of lay everything on the table. Let's just talk freely about
Nietzsche
subjects.
said,
let's have open science. But
I'm not a Nietzschean, but I say Nietzsche said that which is falling ought to be pushed. And I think Nietzsche was right in that respect, at least. Yeah.
We're up early and on our way to the Snæfellsnes Peninsula in the west of Iceland. 1,000 years ago, a temple was built on a mountain which overlooks the sea, called Helgafell, in dedication to the Norse god Thor.
So, do you know what the two other wishes should be?
I don't know.
Don't tell them to us.
Maybe one is fine, I think. I don't think it matters if you tell people. I don't know. That's like a...
Tom has a challenging boxing fight coming up back home in England and hopes to make a prayer.
Yeah, that's fine. There's 2 eggs there as well.
Yeah, to take the actual... To say Monday, I'm not going to eat like lunch at noon.
Strange lunch, but it will be alright. There's about a foot of snow over the road in parts, and ice under that, and no snow plows come in so far today, and so it's just very slippy. And if we roll down into the fjord, we will die, probably. So hopefully we can trust our driver here, a native Icelander who knows the roads or the conditions. But the storm is coming, a severe weather warning in about 3 hours, so we've got to get up to the Holy Mountain and back again before the storm catches us, because if we try and cross this fjord in a storm, we'll be in a bit of trouble, I think.
You look around us, people are sick, people are degrading physically, we're getting sluggish, people have lost their self-confidence. You know, Nietzsche talks about this to a great extent about Europe. It's like we had this great amount of energy leading into the 20th century, and then now we are just in this state of sort of shock and shame and self-doubt. Things have gone terribly wrong. I mean, you just look at the leadership of countries in the West, you look at the state of the United States, you look at the horrors of the grooming gangs in your own country, and the way that politicians have continued to cover up these, you know, heinous acts like mass
the media
rapes.
have been complicit as well, not just the politicians. It's terrible.
So it's like there's something deeply spiritually rotten in our societies today. There's something deeply psychologically twisted about the world we're in, and you know, there doesn't seem to be the will to tackle these 10,000 foot level crises that we're at. It's like all of these crises keep kind of building on each other, and there just isn't really the psychological or the political or the spiritual will to reorder our societies back to something that's oriented with God, that's oriented with the divine, however you would put it. Are there elements in your belief system, in the ancient Germanic worldview, that give you hope, that give you something to look towards, or are we basically facing Ragnarok?
I never looked for consolation in my religion. I just try to understand things as they are. So I don't look for a message of hope, or it's not a soteriological religion doctrine so much. It's like there can be salvation. I think that good things are rewarded and bad things punished, but it's not so much about salvation. The world has bad people in it, but that's an opportunity. I mean, that's an opportunity. Like the heroic mindset of the Germanic, the man, the Teuton, if you will. This is an opportunity. Anything bad is an opportunity. Any dragon is a chance for you to be a dragon slayer. So that's how you have to look at it. Like all of these tasks are like you know, Tolkien. We don't choose what time we're given. We are only given the chance to choose what we do with that time. I misused that quote, but you know, the same principle. Paraphrase. There is hope in that sense. Like you have a chance to live in an extraordinary time, and all sorts of things are happening. Like the nothing happens bros they're losing, because all around the world things are changing, like at a rapid rate, and very negatively in some respects, like the huge movements of people into my country, in Britain, for example. But also, that can't last. That's not sustainable. The actual intended outcome of these movements, which is that it will create a new nation, is obviously misguided. It will not create a new nation. I'm not afraid of their vision of the world, because it's not going to work. It won't happen. What will happen is mass conflict and a great deal of suffering. But within that suffering will be great opportunity for some men to be heroic. And heroism is the ultimate goal of man. Honor is the ultimate goal for man, to achieve honor through honorable deeds. And fighting against those who are dishonorable is a very good way to achieve honor. So in that sense, there are opportunities in this time. You're lucky, in a way, to be born now, because if you were born in a time where everyone was virtuous, then there wouldn't be very many opportunities for honor.
It's the most breathtaking place I've ever been. I celebrated my 23rd birthday with these nice gentlemen I'm on the trip with. It's already like the best birthday because of the mountains and everything, man. Finally, I'm a true Norwegian. Yeah. Oh my god. What the fuck? We're seeing mountains, which is, you know, one of my favorite things, and the mountains here are otherworldly, different from anywhere else I've been. I see people constantly posting travel content, and these blow anything out of the water. Words cannot describe what you're seeing, and the videos cannot really capture what it's like for your soul to observe it. It's so wonderful.
There's something we're chasing when we're traveling. We're following the sagas, we're going to significant locations.
But religious discussions and the spirit of man, what we're missing. That was the main thesis of your discussion with Tom and many discussions we had. So, I mean, I guess Kurt Vonnegut would put this in a certain way. Hume, Montaigne, Nietzsche, the idea of becoming. That's, I think, what we're just trying to gain understanding, not only just in the experiences. It's not just like we're making some little TikTok short that's like 8 seconds long. It's like chase real dopamine, and it's a really pretty picture.
What's kind of hit me on this trip is it's this feeling that even though we're going to the same places as these figures from the sagas, even though we're walking in their footsteps in a way, part of it just feels out of reach. It's kind of like if you go to Disneyland. It feels very scripted. It feels like the possibility for organic adventure. Something about that has like evaporated or seems out of reach.
The way that it is treated is part of what makes its reality.
Because there does seem to be this disconnect that in the 21st century, we're kind of incapable of living in this way that's archetypal, in the way that, you know, heroes or men of the past were. Like, if you were to become a knight, if there's kind of this path, there's this hero's journey, but also I think a lot of it may come down to the technology.
I feel like it's ultimately about the way you perceive the story and the aspects of the stories. There can be many of these things that play out, I've even noticed in my own life, of reconciliation and recovery and kindness and friendship and strength and perseverance, and being able to, you know, see your shortcomings and you know, fail and continue on to inevitably succeed.
We're still, in many ways, the same people that we were 100 years ago, 2,000 years ago. But it's kind of like if you're in a stage play and you're supposed to enact Henry V. But instead of having bows and arrows, your costume has changed and you're in like sweatpants. Instead of a sword, you're given like a
Glock 19.
A Glock 19. You replace the trees with some concrete building, and with a Office Max. It's like we're still the same. Like, we're still human in the same way, but like our relationship. I think someone used the phrase, it's like actor-arena relationship. So it's like, how do we take ourselves seriously when, even though we're made of the same stuff as our ancestors, who fit very naturally into these sorts of stories, all of our settings, our costumes have changed. So now we live in this world that like feels very artificial and fake and like unserious.
So you don't have to be fighting in great battles or, you know, allegorically defeating a dragon. But, you know, the mountain is you. You are going to surmount something great, and you don't have to be literally becoming, you know, a man amongst men or becoming the renowned name of the age. You can be doing something that's amazing, even in the mundane, that's in your own life. And that's what I think, in a way, many people have to take from this literature. And also they have to recognize their connection to the literature and the stories and how they're a physical embodiment of these ancestors, these thousands of voices. And that voice of your ancestors speaks every day.
By tracing the greatest writers of the 20th century, like Lewis and Tolkien, we find they were steeped in this same rich history and mythology of our past. For some time, I've had a growing feeling and intuition that Christians in the West have lost something essential to our lives. We've lost a living connection to our folkways, our traditions, and our aesthetic instincts. It would seem that this is an essential project of our age that many pagan revivalists have been embarking upon. Is the age of sagas dead and buried? Is God done with the North? Are our days of adventure forever spent? Has our spiritual infidelity left our hearts cold and dead? Are the great stories and heroism of the past only in the dead burial mounds and codices of our history? Or are there still sagas and stories yet to be told? Does the revival of paganism herald, perhaps, a desire for spiritual rebirth and a renaissance of aesthetics and a transvaluation of values on our horizon? Perhaps God is not yet done with us, after all. In the autobiography of C.S. Lewis, titled Surprised by Joy, Lewis writes of his profound encounters with Wagner in the literature of the Etic cosmos, in the beautiful and painful yearning he calls Northernness. In his boyhood, Lewis describes encountering the poem Tegner's Drapa by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and hearing of the Norse god Balder for the first time. I heard a voice that cried, "Balder the Beautiful is dead, is dead." I knew nothing about Balder, but instantly I was uplifted into huge regions of northern sky. I desired with almost sickening intensity something never to be described, except that it is cold, spacious, severe, pale, and remote. And then found myself at the very same moment, already falling out of that desire and wishing I were back in it.
At least back in ancient times, conversions of entire people began always with the elite and in the urban centers, and then only slower and much later would it disseminate onto the countryside. And that's also why, unironically, I think traditional Christians today in the West, we are the heathens. We are the old school rural people who are holding fast to the traditions of the forefathers. While the urban centers and all our elites. So I mean, in a sense, Tom, we are the last pagans.
Yeah. You're the new pagans, and the woke are the new Christians.
Yeah.
But lots of people have compared woke to Christianity. You know, pro-Christian authors as well will say, liberal Christian authors like Tom Holland will say, the liberal assumptions of West are all of Christian origin, which is true, I think.
I don't think so. Yeah.
I think
TikTok, they think they were talking about Spider-Man.
The Christians in Iceland, they still practice infanticide. Even though it hadn't
even though it's
a lot more
opposed to the
pagans in the Viking Age, because they were pre-industrial, and because they didn't give a shit about like laws against eating wolves, like even though they believed in scripture. And this idea that theory alone imposes how you live and view reality is really like kind of like a communistic view of thinking, because the communists are obsessed with theory and they think theory alone dictates how you live your life.
Oh. One interesting sentiment that I have often encountered also among, if not all, then most traditional Christians, is that when we meet traditional pagans, we prefer them. We see a greater sense of overlap and community with those than with atheists or materialists, because we have this shared agreement on the importance of the transcendence. We often have a keen knowledge about the objectivity of certain moral values. And I've found this sentiment many times, because I've done also some videos on my YouTube channel before about talking about Norse paganism, and many people have written things like, well, I will always prefer a pagan to an atheist, for example. I find that sentiment quite interesting. How, from the other side of the aisle, do you view that?
Stein lid. Who needs a lid for their beer? Just drink it. Just drink it and then throw it away.
Can you see the small idols?
Yeah, they're quite overpriced. Well, that's about normal price. I've got 2 of those already.
What about a good pipe to bring home with you?
Yeah. Well, we have pipes in England.
When I became a heathen, I was already a perennialist. So I was interested, before I was heathen, I was like calling myself a pagan in general, but without having a specific mode of practice, and I just said I was pagan because I believed vaguely in some things and I was interested in ancient religions. But I also was a perennialist, influenced by René Guénon and Julius Evola, and you know, I don't believe that there's one true religion. It's not that I practice heathenry because I think it's the one true religion for mankind. It's just that this is the best way for me to engage with the divine. And I like the idea that people say religions are vocabularies or languages with which we engage with the divine.
Oh, no.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Let me take a photo of that one.
Uh-oh. Do you view traditional Christians as allies or foes in this fight, or how do we stand or relate to each other?
Yeah, this is the same thing. I mean, anyone who has a perspective opposed to the dominant culture of the age, by having a perspective of being and history that is in any way opposed to that, you are in some way an ally, and as all cultures are, and specifically within the West, is just Christians and pagans, really. So, well, as in the native cultures, because some of the other shared theistic, fellow theists of the world who are in the West are actually still enemies because they choose to work against the interests of the natives. But globally speaking, like, they are all theistic traditional societies are allies against this evil of the age. But I'm not scared of it. I know it's going to lose because it's wrong, and it can't sustain itself. And also it just doesn't really spread as well as it thinks it can. It assumes the inevitability of its victory, but it's constantly failing when it is tried to export it. It does eventually seduce immigrant populations, but it takes several generations, and even then they pervert and twist it to their own ends. So it doesn't have a future in the long term. But whether Christians or pagans will emerge victorious from the ashes of liberalism, I don't know.
No, time will tell.
Any answers?
I was home. I am an honored guest. My lord, it is your responsibility to provide me with food and shelter. Rude Icelanders.
It's an Icelandic sheepdog.
That's sacrilege. Don't you know that's Leif Erikson's statue?
One of the early church fathers, Saint Basil, a Greek, who talked about this issue because this was in the 4th century, and he was responding to a letter he had received about whether it was licit for Christians, in this case Greek Christians, to read the Iliad and the Odyssey because they are full of a pagan worldview, a pagan mythology, and in no substantial sense bearing resemblance to Christianity. So would it be fine for these Greek people to read the Iliad? And I mean, that poses a good dilemma touching upon some of these issues, I think, because if he would have said no, you would lose such an important and monumental part of Greek identity and Greek cultural achievement. If he said yes, there might be the danger of syncretism and to give approval to these things. He responded like this and explained it very beautifully. He said that you should be like the honeybee and not the fly. Because when the fly flies out, it will land alike on flowers and dung. It will take everything, the good with the bad. When the honeybee flies out, it will seek out only the flowers, and only by visiting what is true, good, and beautiful will it collect the nectar from there and return back home. So be like the honeybee and not the fly.
Discriminating.
Exactly, discriminating. So I think, for example, we see, if we should form a segue maybe to the first encounter between Christianity and Germanic paganism, I think that we saw that approach in the early medieval Germanic approach to paganism, because we didn't really have this sort of very harsh iconoclastic view. Rather, we saw authors such as Snorri and Saxo Grammaticus writing down these stories. Also, I think out of a sense, whether how conscious it was, I don't know, but out of a sense of out of a fear of losing these memories, losing these stories. There were some sort of importance to them that they wanted to keep them, even though they were pagan and even though they had a heartbreak with the pagan religion as such, they still saw a value in these stories that should be kept.
Years and several chapters later, he would encounter this connection yet again, and coming upon the illustrations of Arthur Rackham and the music of Wagner. My general appreciation of music was not at first much altered. Music was one thing, Wagnerian music quite another, and there was no common measure between them. It was not a new pleasure, but a new kind of pleasure, if indeed pleasure is the right word, rather than trouble, ecstasy, astonishment, a conflict of sensations without name. I'd met this before, long, long ago, in Tegnér's Drapa, that Siegfried belonged to the same world as Balder and the sunward sailing cranes. There rose at once almost like heartbreak, the memory of joy itself. The knowledge that I had once had what I now lacked for years. That I was returning at last from exile on desert lands to my own country.
There are people all the time doing things that are undeniably heroic, but what we've lost is the ability to focus on them and celebrate them and remember them properly. Instead, because we focus so much on, weakness and suffering and the other as like the subject of narrative, and that people I don't think people will reject in a cinematic form a conquering hero. In fact, in the 1980s, the unstoppable hero was still a very common subject, and in Schwarzenegger films and things, like the guy who's just like people firing machine guns at him and for some reason that never hit him. Yeah. Like this is old James Bond films as well. So people want that. Still, the desire for it's still there, and the heroes are still there. all that needs to change is that our capacity to celebrate them properly and to write stories and depict stories where heroes are central.
The question also reminds me of this meme that often goes around, especially on Twitter, where they'll have like a picture of a beautiful European cathedral, and they'll ask like, why don't we build cathedrals anymore? And the reply will be something like, because to make such magnificent transcendental art, you need to have transcendent values, you need to have a belief and faith in these things, and we don't have that anymore, so people don't really want to make these, what could you say, like sublime expressions of artistic product, because that really springs from some more foundational values. And I think these values have truly been lost. So we can still make entertainment, but whether we can still make,
well, Notre Dame was done pretty well. They can do it. They've rebuilt it. They can show that they can rebuild it. We have the skills still. Yes. We have the ability, and there is a desire for it.
Yes.
I think the main problem I'm just sorry to be pedantic, but I think the main problem with why people don't build cathedrals anymore is because it's very expensive to build like that, and it's hard to get the funding.
Yes. But but to build that, so we can rebuild what is broken. But do we still have the capacity to make the new cathedral? Because I'm not just talking about
a new architectural style, equivalent to Gothic, but
yes,
not Gothic.
Or something equivalent to the medieval cathedral. Because today, for example, if I go to any major European or American city, I'll see the same boring concrete and steel structures, and the highest, the tallest ones all have to do with finance. It's corporation headquarters, whether I'm in Dubai, London, Moscow, Copenhagen, Berlin, whatever, it's the same things.
I think that's the money mind. It's the mind of like, keeping, the bottom line, and it doesn't realize that actually, I mean, the medieval cathedrals provided economic opportunities to many craftsmen, and it was a great collaborative effort. And but I think there's a focus now on the, like minimizing expenses in architecture.
Yes.
You can always spend a little bit more. Just talking about a house and not a grand public building now. Just a little bit more for to make a house a bit nicer. Just like have a little, like sometimes you see in Iceland, the gables have been, ornamented with like some craftsmanship. That makes all the difference.
Yeah.
But people like thinking, how much money have I got, and what's the maximum I can get in size, or should I have a slightly smaller house and spend that extra money on, ornament? And they always go for size instead of ornament.
And that's why I want to base it in a spiritual impoverishment, because it is this monetary or materialistic spirit that has infected us Europeans, I believe. Yeah. Because when you had traders and the middle class in the towns, medieval towns, if we look at the few examples of surviving furniture from the medieval era, you had these beautiful ornate cabinets, beds, and so on, and they were extremely poor. And if you ask the carpenter, well, just like put the poles together, you don't have to spend all these working hours carving and so on, it's fine, then they could have saved a lot of money, which was sorely needed. Yet they didn't. They didn't. They still,
because they had pride in their work.
They had pride. There was a sort of spiritual value. Same with the medieval cathedrals. Of course, they were economic centers, and the pilgrimage trade was a huge economic activity. Yet still, the time and energy spent on carving, for example, small gargoyles high up in towers, which would never be seen, was made still, because there was such an important, like, I'm not just doing this to maximize, the GDP. I'm doing this for the glory of God.
Yes, it's the same that you can see on churches and Greek temples. Like the pediment of Greek temples, the reverse of the gods on them is carved perfectly. Yeah. No one can ever see that. No, exactly. But they did it perfectly because the gods can see it.
Yes, it was done for piety. Yeah, and we've lost that. Yes,
and there was that kind of aspect of it as well. There is less religious aspect, but I mean, religious art still exists. If you go to like the Far East and like new Buddhist temples are being made, Muslims were making new mosques, so it's just it's mostly just us in the West that have lost that.
Yes, it gives I think an interesting answer to the question as to why we don't do that anymore in the West. I think we've lost some of that spiritual foundation needed to have the motivation to build something that will last for the next 500 years.
In comparing the literary nature of mythology and biblical theology, Lewis wrote in The Weight of Glory, "If Christianity is only a mythology, then I find the mythology I believe in is not the one I like best. I like Greek mythology much better, Irish better still, Norse best of all. The divine light of theology, we are told, lighteneth every man. We should, therefore, expect to find in the imagination of great pagan teachers and myth-makers some glimpse of that theme which we believe to be the very plot of the whole cosmic story, the theme of incarnation, death, and rebirth. And the differences between the pagan Christs, Balder, Osiris, etc., and the Christ himself is much more what we should expect to find. The pagan stories are all about someone dying and rising, either every year, or else nobody knows where and nobody knows when. The Christian story is about a historical personage whose execution can be dated pretty accurately under a Roman magistrate, and with whom the society that he founded is in a continuous relation down to the present day. It is not the difference between falsehood and truth. It is the difference between a real event on the one hand, and dim dreams or premonitions of that same event on the other. It's like watching something come gradually into focus. First, it hangs in the clouds of myth and ritual, vast and vague. Then it condenses. The essential meaning of all things came down from the heaven of myth to the earth of history. In doing so, it partly emptied itself of its glory, as Christ emptied himself of his glory to be man. Later, in Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis recounts, "Early in 1926, the hardest boiled of all the atheists I ever knew sat in my room, and remarked that the evidence for the historicity of the Gospels was surprisingly good. Rum thing, all that stuff about the dying God. Rum thing. It almost looks as if it had really happened once." Long after Plato and Aristotle were baptized in the pages of theology, in the workshops, chapels, and basilicas of Rome and Florence, artists like Botticelli and Michelangelo infused the life of a cultural renaissance into their cities. Far up in the north, the birth of modern fantasy through writers like Tolkien and Lewis, themselves steeped in Wagnerian, Old English, and Eddic poetry, pulls deeply from a well of collective memory, the folklore, the sagas, our mythology, our ancient spiritual instincts, and our shared history of wars, of cold winters around the hearth, of deep forests, of ice and moss and stone, of battling against the high seas at the edge of the fog-shrouded map. These are stories that have filled us with life, the stories of heroism and valor in the face of certain death, of adventurers journeying to unseen and mysterious lands in the horizon, of the crownless again becoming kings, and wanderers finding their lost halls. These stories were written for us, from the tales of Beowulf, the literature of Snorri Sturluson and Saxo Grammaticus, the grand operas of Richard Wagner, and the fantasies of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and even the popularity of Norse and Viking-themed media today. There's been a burgeoning and subliminal desire to tap back into the deep roots of our old cosmology. Look at this. Unbelievable. It's like we're in paradise. Like this place was custom made for my taste.
If you really come down to any large story, it interests people, can hold them attention for a considerable time, or make the stories, practically always, a human story is practically always about one thing, aren't they? Death. The inevitability of death.
He says all great stories are about death. Do you see that reflected in your worldview?
Yes, I think all of life is about death. Life is given meaning by death. Without death, life has no meaning. That's why I oppose transhumanists, specifically the post-human doctrine of opposing death. Those who say that, like, some transhumanists will argue that anyone who is in favor of death is in a death cult, that death is an unnecessary biological accident. I say that without death, life has no value. It's what makes life valuable. It's like, you know, Why is a flower so part of what flowers are beautiful because they wilt and perish? It's like a sunset, like it's a moment. Time, we as living beings experience time. Time doesn't have any real meaning when you don't have an end. The way that we process data as living organisms is a story. The story is defined by a beginning, a middle, and end. The end is what makes the perfect poem. Without that poetry, without that end, there is no meaning. In heathenry, we also believe in the afterlife. We believe in hereafter. We believe in rewards, in like glory for the glorious who go to certain halls, and punishment for the wicked. And also, we believe that there is reincarnation and that some people will come back. The best people hopefully come back again in their descendants, and that therefore there is an immortality through bloodlines. Even that reincarnation is an affirmation of the value of death, because you can't come back until you've died. And it's all about linking birth and death. Through birth, the dead are reborn. Through death, you have the chance of rebirth. So death is central and so important. And heathenry specifically is a religion of necromancy. Our Lord Odin, the highest god, practices necromancy. He takes wisdom from the dead. He visits the underworld and he shows us, demonstrates to us through myth, a process by which we would learn from the dead. And you can see that in the sagas too, where people from Iceland would visit the barrows where their forefathers were buried, and through various rites find ways to learn from the dead. So we believe the dead are present with us, and we believe that they provide us with information, knowledge, wisdom. And we should live always in consciousness of death, remembering the value of our ancestors, but also seeing our ancestors in our children, seeing a constant line that links the past and the future, the living and the dead, in an everlasting chain. And that brings meaning to life, far more than the pursuit of an organism that doesn't die, which I think is a kind of masked nihilism. There is a road, and it leads to Valhalla. It's 400 meters over there.
We are so close. Finally.
Can you believe it, guys?
Can you believe it? Tomorrow, just a week away.
Our souls or spirit, there's something eternal there, and to see it disappear seems, to my instincts, unnatural. And to me, there's always this part of me that's like, rage against the dying of the light. I want to keep pressing on. But also, in some ways, I see that as well within Odin, as he approaches Ragnarok, as he rallies warriors to himself, as he seeks for a way to survive. He goes to the Cirrus, looking for the vision of Ragnarok. At the end, he's fighting until the very end, and then there is, within Voluspa, there's the description that there will be a new world. Whether Odin makes it to that new world.
Well, Odin dies, but if you understand the Germanic worldview, it's always rebirth. Like Vidar and Vali survive. His son survives, so he survives. It's not
Baldur.
Really. Well, Baldur will come back as well. Baldur dies and he comes back. So Baldur, in his case, it's not so much reincarnation. He literally comes out of hell. People loved their friends and family and weren't happy when they died. There's a Germanic practice of mourning such that the women would scratch their faces to show that they were mourning. So it's not like they didn't value life, but they also valued death, because death provided something more valuable than life, which is opportunities for glory and honor and fame, which undying fame. One thing we know about Proto-Indo-Europeans is they believed in this concept that survives in the sagas of undying fame, and it's one of the only personal names we can reconstruct that the Proto-Indo-Europeans had is a name that means undying fame. So this is like 5,000-6,000 years ago. Our ancestors were calling their child undying fame. So they recognized that this was central to existence. Like, this is something that you must aspire towards.
And that's within the Havamal, cattle die and kinsmen die.
It's the exact same sentiments. And it just shows that the Havamal is not just a 13th century written text. It's something that spans back wisdom for thousands and thousands of years, 6,000 years at least. Probably, in my opinion, a lot more, because, just because the Indo-Europeans had it doesn't mean they invented it. I'm sure that it comes from the hunter-gatherer ancestors of the Indo-Europeans going way back in the Ice Age. And I read my great-grandfather's war diaries. In the First World War he fought, and on the day before he went into Battle of the Luce and was shot in the foot and captured, he wrote in his diary, "Tomorrow I may achieve that which every man without exception wishes, to achieve a glorious death." That could have been written in the First World War, the Second World War, the Trojan War. It's just an eternally glorious and manly virtue that even people like us who are raised on whatever, Mickey Mouse or Sonic the Hedgehog or whatever the things that children are raised on and the phony values that are imbued in children today, they naturally understand this value. It's just there in humanity. It predates us. It's of divine origin, because it's something that even a god can respect. The gods love people who laugh in the face of death. They love that because it's beautiful. In Homer, you've got the death of Hector, but you also have the mourning of the father, and the request to take the remains of his son from the Greeks. I believe in the heroic ideal. Would I be happy to see my son shot to pieces and to carry his battered corpse? No, I would mourn and be in tears, but it doesn't cancel it out. It's like this post-war ideology was trying to say, like, because death causes suffering and war causes people to suffer, therefore the people who glorify war are evil and wrong, and they cause this suffering. But they've missed the whole point. They've missed everything. Like, the people who achieved glory in war knew that. They knew that the death would cause suffering before they died, before they killed. It was always known. This isn't a new discovery with the Second World War. Like, we've suddenly discovered that war is bad. It's so puerile. It's asinine perspective. But that is it brings meaning that is transcendent and makes life more valuable.
There was a quotation from Simon Beauvoir that I read in the paper the other day, which seems to me put it in a nutshell. I think I'll read it. There is no such thing as a natural death. Nothing that happens to man is ever natural, since his presence calls the whole world into question. All men must die, but for every man his death is an accident, and even if he knows it and consents to it, an unjustifiable violation. Well, you may agree with the words or not, but those are the keyspring of the laws of the ring.
During the climb, I can't look back, and I can't speak.
seen by many who will appreciate the holiness of your hill. Hail Thor!